The scream echoed through the big house at 6 in the morning. Mary dropped the wooden spoon on the kitchen floor and ran down the hallway, her apron still tied around her waist. The noise came from Mrs. Carmen's room, the matriarch of the Thompson family, lost for 2 years in the maze of Alzheimer's. When Mary reached the half-open door, she found the old woman sitting up in bed, her glassy eyes fixed on nothing, repeating a name that sent a chill down the cook's spine. Loretta. Loretta? Where's Loretta? Mary's legs trembled. Loretta was her mother's name. Her mother, dead for 15 years, who had worked in this same house decades ago. Her mother, who never spoke about what happened here, only saying that rich folks don't have hearts. Mrs. Carmen, are you okay? Mary approached slowly, as she always did when the disease struck. The old woman extended a trembling hand, gripping Mary's wrist with surprising strength. For a second, her eyes seemed to see beyond the fog. You hold the pan the same way she did. The same smell of cinnamon on your hands. Mary didn't know what to say. She stood there, letting Mrs. Carmen squeeze her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Richard Thompson appeared at the door, his suit impeccable even at that hour. The 52-year-old businessman never slept in. He controlled every detail of his mother's routine the way he ran his companies, with spreadsheets, schedules, and medical reports. What's going on here? His voice cut through the air like a blade. Mary released her employer's hand and stepped back, lowering her eyes. She knew that tone well. It was the same one he used when he found a glass out of place or when lunch was 5 minutes late. She had a crisis, Mr. Richard. It's passing now. But Mrs. Carmen wasn't done. She turned her face directly to her son, and for the first time in months her voice came out clear, sharp as a whip. Promise me this time you won't ruin her life. The silence that followed was deafening. Mary saw Richard stiffen, his jaw clenched. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt an old rotten tension in the air, like spoiled food at the back of the fridge. Mom, you're not well. I'm calling Dr. Henry. Richard left the room with heavy steps, but Mary noticed his hands trembling as he closed the door. Mrs. Carmen slipped back into the foggy world of her illness, murmuring softly, "Don't let him do it again. Don't let him." Mary stayed for another 10 minutes until the old woman's breathing calmed. When she returned to the kitchen, her legs still shaky, she found Richard sitting at the breakfast nook, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. "Mary." He didn't look up. "My mom's been very confused lately. The doctor says it's normal. She mixes up people times, don't pay attention to what she says." "Yes, Mr. Richard. And..." He hesitated, running a hand through his graying hair. "If she gets agitated again, call me immediately. Don't stay alone with her when she's like that." Mary nodded, but a quiet anger grew in her chest. Why was he afraid to leave his own mother alone with her? What could Mrs. Carmen say that made him so nervous? The next few days were strange. Richard changed the household routine. He hired a nurse to stay with Mrs. Carmen during the day, claiming it was for her own good. The nurse, Ms. Sylvia, was a stern, efficient woman who treated the patient like an object to be kept clean and medicated on schedule. Mary watched everything from the kitchen. She saw how Mrs. Carmen refused food, how she screamed when Ms. Sylvia tried to bathe her, how she spent hours staring out the window with empty eyes. But when Mary entered the room, everything changed. The old woman calmed down. She ate the soup Mary prepared with care. She let her hair be brushed without resistance. And sometimes she held Mary's hand and sighed as if she'd found a safe harbor. "You have her heart," she murmured. "The same kind heart." Mary didn't ask who Mrs. Carmen was talking about. Deep down, she knew. One afternoon, Ms. Sylvia left early due to a personal issue. Mary was alone with Mrs. Carmen when the old woman had another crisis. This time was different. Mrs. Carmen got up from her armchair as if she were 20 years younger, walked to the old desk in the corner of the room, and began rummaging through the drawers. "Where are the letters I wrote to her?" Mary approached cautiously. "What letters, Mrs. Carmen?" "To Loretta. I wrote so many letters asking for forgiveness. But I never had the courage to send them." Her voice broke. "I never had the courage to tell the truth." "What truth?" Mrs. Carmen stopped searching the drawers and looked directly at Mary. For a moment, her eyes were completely lucid, heavy with old pain. "Your mother didn't steal anything. She never stole anything." I made up that story. Mary felt the floor slip away. What are you saying? She found out that my husband, Richard's father, was embezzling money from the company. Small amounts at first, then it got bigger. She came to me because she trusted me. She didn't know what to do. Mrs. Carmen's voice grew weaker but remained clear. And God forgive me, I chose to protect my husband. I told her to stay quiet, that we were an important family, that a scandal could ruin everything. But she wouldn't. She said she was going to the authorities. Mary was frozen, tears starting to fall. So I made up that she'd stolen money from the house. I planted evidence, called the police. She was fired on the spot, couldn't get another job in any household in town. No one wanted to hire a thief. My mother, Mary could barely speak. My mother was never the same after that. I know. I always knew. And when I heard she had passed away, when I learned she left a daughter alone in the world, Mrs. Carmen collapsed into the chair. I've carried that guilt for 20 years. Every night, every damn night. Mary knelt beside the chair, holding the old woman's cold hands. Why are you telling me this now? Because you're here. Because God brought you back to this house. And because I'm dying, Mary. My mind is fading, but before I forget everything, someone needs to know the truth. Mrs. Carmen cupped Mary's face with both hands. Your mother was a good woman, honest. And I ruined her life to protect a man who wasn't worth the dirt on her shoes. Mary cried. She cried for the years her mother spent in bitterness, for the jobs she couldn't get, for the shame she carried until her death. She cried for the injustice that poisoned her childhood. And she cried for Mrs. Carmen, a woman who carried the weight of that lie until her mind began to unravel. What do I do now? Mary whispered. I don't know, my dear. I only know I can't die without you knowing the truth. They were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Richard walked in and froze at the sight of the two women embracing, tears streaming down their faces. What happened here? Mary stood slowly, wiping her face with her hands. Mrs. Carmen had slipped back into the haze of her illness, staring out the window as if nothing had happened. Nothing, Mr. Richard. Your mother got a little agitated, but it's past. Richard looked suspiciously from one to the other. Mary, I need to talk to you. In the study. Now. Mary followed her employer down the hall, her heart pounding. In the study, he closed the door and turned to her. Mary, how long have you worked here? 2 years, Mr. Richard. And before that? Where did you work? In a few houses. Why are you asking this? Richard walked to the window, hands behind his back. My mother's been saying strange things. Names of people who aren't part of our lives. I'm worried that someone might be influencing her. Influencing? People with her condition are vulnerable, Mary. Sometimes unscrupulous employees take advantage. They make them believe things that didn't happen to gain something. Mary's blood boiled. Are you implying that I'm not implying anything. I just want to be clear that any attempt to take advantage of my mother's condition will have serious consequences. Very serious. Mr. Richard, I'd never do such a thing. I hope not. He turned to her, his eyes cold. Because if I find out someone's filling my mother's head with lies or manipulating her in any way, that person will regret it bitterly. Understood? Mary nodded, but inside she was seething. How dare he threaten her when it was his family that had ruined her mother's life? Dismissed. And remember, complete discretion about anything my mother says in her confused moments. They're just delusions of a sick mind. Mary left the study with shaky legs. In the hallway, she bumped into Teresa, the house manager, a woman in her early 40s who had worked for the family for over a decade. You okay, Mary? You look pale. Mary looked at Teresa. Could she trust her? Did she know anything about what happened to her mother? Teresa, did you ever know an employee named Loretta who worked here years ago? Teresa's face changed instantly. She glanced around nervously. Why are you asking that? Mrs. Carmen mentions her name sometimes. I got curious. Teresa pulled Mary to a quieter corner. Mary, if I were you, I wouldn't go asking about this family's past. Some things are better left buried. What kind of things? The kind that could cost you your job or worse. Teresa squeezed Mary's arm. You're a good woman. You do great work. Don't ruin it by digging into old stories. Mary felt a chill in her stomach. Teresa, do you know what happened to Loretta? I know she left overnight. I know Mr. Richard changed after that, became more closed off. And I know Mrs. Carmen was never the same. Teresa lowered her voice. But I also know that people who ask too many questions in this house don't last long. That night, Mary could barely sleep. Lying in her small upstairs room, she replayed everything Mrs. Carmen had told her. Her mother, innocent. Her mother, a victim of a cruel setup. And now she was working for the children of the people who destroyed her family. But Mrs. Carmen was different. She carried the guilt, suffered for it. And Richard, did he know the truth? Or did he truly believe his family was honest and upright? Mary decided she would find out. For her mother, for her memory, for the justice that had never been done. But she knew she'd have to be very careful. Richard was already suspicious. Teresa had warned her about the risks. And deep down, very deep down, Mary felt something she didn't want to admit even to herself. Over the past few months, she had started noticing Richard differently. The way he spoke softly to his mother on tough days. The way his eyes welled up when Mrs. Carmen didn't recognize him. He could be harsh, controlling, arrogant, but he was also a son who suffered watching his mother fade away. And that made everything more complicated. How could she be falling for the son of the man who destroyed her family? Mary woke at 5 in the morning with a decision made. She would look for proof. If Mrs. Carmen was telling the truth, there had to be some trace of what happened 20 years ago in this house. She went downstairs to the kitchen in the dark, turning on only the small light above the sink. She began preparing coffee as she always did, but this time she paid attention to every corner, every drawer, every cabinet she'd never fully explored. The kitchen was large, with old, dark wood furniture. Some cabinets had ancient locks, others were always open. Mary started with the highest ones, the ones she needed a stool to reach. In the third cabinet, behind a row of rusty cans that seemed to have been there for decades, her fingers touched something different. A small, heavy metal box. Mary looked around, her heart racing. It was 5:30 in the morning. Richard wouldn't be up until 6. Mrs. Carmen was still asleep. It was the perfect time. She sat on the kitchen floor and opened the box carefully. Inside were letters, many letters, all with the same neat handwriting on the envelopes. To Loretta. None had been sent. Mary picked up the first letter with trembling hands. The date on the envelope was from 21 years ago, 2 months after her mother's dismissal. Dear Loretta, I don't know how to start this letter. I don't even know if I have the right to write your name after what we did to you. Mary stopped reading, tears blurring her vision. It was real. Everything Mrs. Carmen had said was true. She continued reading. I know you'll never forgive me, and you have every right. I know we ruined your life out of sheer cowardice. My husband was stealing. You were right to want to report him. But I was afraid. Afraid of the scandal. Afraid of losing our place in society. I chose to protect someone who didn't deserve it and sacrifice someone who was innocent. The letter went on for 2 pages, detailing everything that confirmed Mrs. Carmen's confession. At the end, a desperate plea. If you can ever forgive me, if you can give me a chance to make up for the harm I caused, I'll do anything. I'll pay any price. I just can't live with this weight on my conscience anymore. Mary opened the second letter, then the third. All the same. All asking for forgiveness. All confessing the same guilt. The last letter was different, more recent, written in shaky handwriting. The date was from just 6 months ago, shortly before Mrs. Carmen's Alzheimer's diagnosis. Loretta, I heard you passed away. I heard you left a daughter. The doctor who told me said she was left alone in the world, that she had to work since she was a child to survive. My heart is shattered. Not only did I take you from this life, I took her chance to have a mother. How will I pay for this? How does anyone pay for destroying 2 lives? Mary couldn't keep reading. She cried there on the cold kitchen floor, clutching the letters her mother never received. That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, she put the letters back in the box and returned it to the cabinet. She stood, wiped her face, and resumed preparing coffee as if nothing had happened. Richard entered the kitchen at his usual time, already dressed for work. Good morning, Mary. Good morning, Mr. Richard. He took the coffee cup, drinking in silence. Mary watched him discreetly. Did he know everything? Was he complicit in the setup against her mother? Mary, his voice snapped her out of her thoughts. I'm working from home today. I have some important meetings and don't want to leave my mother alone with the nurse. Yes, sir. And, he hesitated, stirring his coffee, I want you to spend more time with her. The nurse is efficient, but my mother seems calmer when you're around." Mary looked up, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I am. Just let me know if she says anything too strange. Things about the past, about people we don't know. The doctor said it could be a sign of worsening, or a sign of a guilty conscience," Mary thought, but only nodded. The day passed slowly. Mary cared for Mrs. Carmen with even more tenderness, knowing now that the old woman wasn't just an employer, but someone carrying immense remorse for the injustice done to her family. In the afternoon, while Richard was in a video conference in his office, Mary took the chance to talk to Mrs. Carmen. "Mrs. Carmen, do you remember what you told me yesterday about my mother?" The old woman looked at her with empty eyes for a moment, then seemed to connect. "Loretta, your mother was Loretta." "She was. I did a terrible thing to her." Her voice was soft, heavy with pain, something I've never forgiven myself for. "I know. You told me. And you..." Mrs. Carmen held Mary's hand. "Do you hate me for it?" Mary was silent for a long moment. She felt anger, yes. She felt rage at the injustice. But looking at this frail, sick woman, carrying guilt for so many years, she couldn't feel hatred. "I don't hate you, Mrs. Carmen, but I want justice for my mother." "Justice." The old woman repeated the word as if it were foreign. "I don't know if I can still give justice to anyone. My mind is fading, Mary. Soon I won't even remember my own name. You could tell your son the truth." Mrs. Carmen grew agitated. "No, Richard can't know. It would destroy him. He loved his father so much, thought he was a hero. But he deserves to know. Does he?" Mrs. Carmen looked directly into Mary's eyes. "What good will it do now? His father's gone. I'm dying. And Richard's a good man, Mary. Unlike his father. He's never hurt anyone." Mary didn't know how to respond. Was Mrs. Carmen right? Would telling the truth only cause more pain? The conversation was interrupted by Teresa, who entered the room with a worried look. "Mary, Mr. Richard wants to talk to you, in the study. Urgent." Mary felt her blood run cold. Had he found out something? In the study, Richard was pacing back and forth, clearly nervous. "Mary, sit down." She sat in the old leather chair, her hands sweaty. "I got a call today. From Dr. Henry, my mother's geriatrician." Richard stopped pacing and stared at her. "He's concerned about her emotional state. Says she's been talking a lot about the past, about guilt and regrets." Mary tried to keep her expression neutral. "The doctor thinks someone might be influencing her, asking questions about old things, stirring up memories that should stay buried. Mr. Richard, I just take care of her. I give her food, medicine, keep her company. Mary," he stepped closer to the chair, crouching to meet her eyes. "I'm going to ask you once, and I want the truth. Did you know my family before you started working here?" Mary's heart raced. She could lie, deny everything. But looking into Richard's eyes, seeing the genuine concern there, she couldn't. "I did." Richard closed his eyes, sighing deeply. "How?" "My mother, she worked here years ago." "When?" 20 years ago." Richard stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus Christ. And her name?" "Loretta. Loretta Smith." Richard stood still for a long moment, his back to Mary. When he turned, his face was pale. "The employee who was fired for theft. She didn't steal anything." Mary stood too, her voice louder than she intended. "She never stole anything in her life." "Mary, your mother told me the truth." "Mrs. Carmen confessed everything. My mother found out your father was embezzling money and was fired for it. They framed her as a thief to protect the real criminal." Richard was silent, processing the information. Then, slowly, he sat in the armchair behind the desk. "My mother told you this?" "She did. In her moments of clarity, she remembers everything, and she suffers for it." "My father..." Richard shook his head. "My father never... I always thought he was an honest man." Mary felt bitterness rise in her throat. "He ruined my mother's life to cover up his crimes, and your mother helped." Richard looked up at her, and Mary saw something she didn't expect. Tears. "Mary, I didn't know any of this." "You didn't?" "No. I was 22 when it happened. Finishing college, living in another state. I only heard that an employee had been fired for theft. My father said it was best not to talk about it, to avoid more scandal. Mary studied his face, searching for signs of deceit, but Richard seemed genuinely shocked. And later, when you came back home, you never suspected anything. My mother changed, became more withdrawn, sadder, but I thought it was age or my father's health problems. Richard ran a hand over his face. Jesus, Mary, how did I not see it? Because you didn't want to see. It's easier to believe your family is perfect. You're right. He looked into her eyes. And is that why you came to work here? To get revenge? Mary hesitated. That was the question she knew would come. No, at least not at first. I needed a job. I had good references. It was only later, when Mrs. Carmen started saying my mother's name, that I realized fate brought me here. And now, what do you want? Justice for my mother. What kind of justice? Mary took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. I want you to publicly acknowledge that she was innocent. I want her name cleared. And I want compensation for the 20 years she suffered because of your family's lie. Richard was silent for a long time. Finally, he stood. Mary, I'll be honest with you. If this is all true, if my father really did what you're saying, then my family owes yours a debt that can never be fully repaid. He walked to the window, looking out at the garden. But I need proof. I can't destroy my father's memory based solely on the confession of a woman with Alzheimer's. I have proof. Richard turned quickly. What proof? Mary took a deep breath. Now or never. Letters. Many letters your mother wrote to mine over the years, all confessing the truth, all asking for forgiveness. Where are these letters? In the kitchen, hidden in an old cabinet. Richard closed his eyes, shaking his head. You read them? I did. And what do they say exactly? Mary told him everything. Every detail of the letters, every confession, every plea for forgiveness. Richard listened in silence, his face growing paler. When she finished, he sat heavily in the armchair. Mary, do you understand what this means? If this story leaks, if it gets to the press, it'll destroy your family's reputation. I know. It's not just that. Richard looked into her eyes. It'll destroy everything I've built. My company, my business. No one will want to do business with the son of a thief. Mary felt an unexpected pang in her chest. It wasn't satisfaction as she'd expected. It was something closer to pity. And what do you plan to do with this information? Richard asked. I don't know yet. Mary, he stood, approaching her again. I know I have little right to ask anything of you, but you could have blackmailed me, sold this story to the press, destroyed everything without giving me a chance to defend myself. Why didn't you? Mary looked into his eyes, feeling the strange connection that had been growing between them over the past months. Because you're not your father, and because your mother has already been paying the price of her guilty conscience for 20 years. And me, his voice was low, vulnerable. What am I to you now, Mary? The enemy? Someone you hate? Mary's heart raced. The question he was asking was dangerous, because the answer was even more dangerous. I don't know, Richard. I don't know what I feel for you anymore. The silence that followed was charged with a different kind of tension, not the tension of revelation or conflict, but the tension of two hearts wrestling with an impossible feeling. Richard took a step toward her. Mary. The study door burst open. Teresa rushed in, eyes wide. Mr. Richard, come quick. Mrs. Carmen's having a bad crisis. She's asking for you and Mary, says she needs to tell you something important before it's too late. Richard and Mary exchanged a glance. They both knew the final moment of truth had arrived, and neither was prepared for the consequences of what was to come. Mary and Richard ran down the hall to Mrs. Carmen's room. They found the old woman sitting up in bed, her eyes clearer than Mary had seen in months. Ms. Sylvia, the nurse, stood by the bed, visibly nervous. She woke up screaming, Mr. Richard. Said she needs to talk to you both urgently. She's very agitated. Leave us, Richard told the nurse. When the door closed, Mrs. Carmen reached out for Mary and her son. Come here, both of you, sit on the bed. Mary hesitated, but Richard signaled for her to comply. They sat on either side of the bed, Mrs. Carmen holding both their hands. My time is running out, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. I feel my mind slipping away a little more each day. But today I'm clear, and I need to speak before it's too late. "Mum," Richard started, but she cut him off. "No, son. This time, you'll listen until I'm done." She looked at Mary. "And you too, my dear, because this story concerns both of you." Mrs. Carmen took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, then continued. "Richard, your father wasn't the man you thought he was, and I wasn't the woman I should have been. Mom, I know. Mary told me everything." "She told you?" Mrs. Carmen looked surprised at Mary. "You told him about the letters?" "I did." "Then you know your mother was innocent. You know we ruined her life out of sheer cowardice." Mrs. Carmen squeezed Mary's hand. "But there's something you don't know. Something even the letters don't tell." Mary's heart raced. "What?" "When I found out your mother had passed away, when I learned you were alone in the world, I tried to find you. I hired a private investigator. I wanted to help, to do something to make up for the harm we caused." "You looked for me?" "I did. And when I finally found you, I learned you were working as a cook in other households. You were getting by, but it was a hard life. So I asked Teresa to hire you." The world seemed to stop for Mary. "What?" "You didn't get this job by chance, my dear. I asked them to bring you here, not to ease my conscience, not to feel better, but because I wanted to meet you. I wanted a chance to ask for forgiveness, and I wanted you to have a better life." Richard looked shocked, glancing from Mary to his mother. "Mom, are you saying—" "I'm saying I brought Loretta's daughter into this house because it was the only way I could think of to try to make amends, even if just a little, for the harm we caused." Mary felt tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me even more. Afraid you'd leave. And because when you arrived here, when I saw how you cared for me with kindness despite everything, I realized you had the same kind heart as your mother." Mrs. Carmen turned to Richard. "And you, my son, you, who've always been so controlled, so rational. I saw how you started looking at Mary differently. I saw how your eyes lit up when she entered the room." Richard flushed. "Mom, don't be ashamed of what you feel, Richard. True love is rare. And when it comes, it doesn't care about social class or circumstances." Mary looked at Richard, confused. "Mrs. Carmen, what are you trying to say?" "I'm saying my son is in love with you, Mary, and I suspect you feel something for him too." The silence that followed was deafening. Mary felt her face burn, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. "Mom, this isn't the time," Richard began. "It's exactly the time," Mrs. Carmen interrupted. "Because I'm dying, son. And before I go, I want to see justice done. Not just for Loretta's memory, but for you two as well." She picked up an envelope from the bedside table. "Yesterday, in the few moments I was lucid, I wrote a full confession. Everything we did, every detail, and more. I instructed my lawyer to create a reparation fund, a sum to be paid to Mary as compensation for the harm done to her family." Mary took the envelope with trembling hands. "Mrs. Carmen, I don't want your money. It's not my money, my dear. It's a debt this family owes you. A debt that can never be fully repaid, but that at least acknowledges the wrong we did." Richard stood, clearly shaken. "Mom, do you understand what this will cause? If this confession goes public, it'll ruin our reputation, it'll tarnish the family name, it'll cause problems for your business." Mrs. Carmen looked at him firmly. "And it's exactly what we deserve." "But Richard hesitated. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't. And that's exactly why I'm certain you'll do the right thing now." Mrs. Carmen smiled sadly. "You're better than your father, Richard. You always were. You have the chance to break the cycle of lies and cowardice that marked this family." Mary quickly read the confession. It was detailed, precise, signed, and dated. With this document, she could completely destroy the Thompson family. "Mrs. Carmen," she said slowly, "if I use this, I'll destroy Richard's life too, and he's never done me any harm." "Oh, Mary," Mrs. Carmen cupped her face with both hands. "You have the same noble heart as your mother. You could take revenge on all of us, but you're worried about hurting an innocent man." Richard looked at Mary with an expression she'd never seen before. Gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart skip a beat. "Mary," he said softly, "you don't need to protect me. If this is the justice your family deserves—" "No," Mary interrupted. "That's not how I want justice." She stood, walked to the window, thoughtful. Outside, the garden was blooming. the afternoon sun gilding the plants. It seemed unreal that on such a beautiful morning, her entire life was changing. "I want you to publicly acknowledge that my mother was innocent," she said finally. "I want her name cleared, but I don't want to destroy anyone in the process." "And how do you suggest we do that?" Richard asked. Mary turned to them. "A donation, a foundation in my mother's name, to help women who've been wronged at work. You can say you discovered a past mistake and want to make it right." Mrs. Carmen smiled. "You're wise, my dear, and far too generous for someone who's been so hurt." "And about us?" Richard asked, standing as well. "About what I feel for you." Mary felt her face burn again. "Richard, no, Mary. My mother's right. I'm in love with you. I know it's complicated. I know this makes things harder, but I can't hide it anymore." "How can I trust what you feel?" Mary asked, her voice breaking. "How do I know it's not guilt or pity or—" "Because what I feel started before I knew any of this." Richard stepped closer. "I noticed you from the first days, Mary. The way you cared for my mother, your dignity, your strength. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was inappropriate, but the heart doesn't listen to reason," Mrs. Carmen finished from the bed. "Just like it didn't when your mother fell in love with your father, Mary." Mary looked at her, surprised. "My mother fell in love with someone here?" "With the gardener, a handsome young man who worked weekends. They met in secret, passed notes." Mrs. Carmen smiled sadly. "It was a pure, innocent love, and I destroyed that too when I fired her." Mary felt another stab of pain. They hadn't just taken her mother's job, they'd taken her love too. "What happened to him?" "I fired him the same day, said I didn't want any more contact between employees." Mrs. Carmen looked down. "I heard later they tried to stay together, but without work, without money. Love couldn't survive the hardships I caused." Richard stepped closer to Mary. "Mary, I won't lie to you. I know this is complicated. I know you may never be able to separate your feelings for me from your feelings about what my family did to yours." "That's true," Mary whispered, "but I also know I can't pretend I don't love you. And I know I saw something in your eyes over these past months that gave me hope." Mary looked into his eyes. They were sincere, vulnerable, nothing like the arrogance he showed at the start. "Richard, I feel something for you too, but I don't know if it's right. I don't know if I could be with you without always remembering the injustice." "Then let's build something new," he said, taking her hand. "Let's create a story that honors your mother's memory but isn't trapped by the past." Mrs. Carmen clapped weakly from the bed. "Oh, how beautiful. My son has finally learned to speak from the heart." Mary laughed despite her tears. "Mrs. Carmen, you're terrible. I'm an old woman who's dying and wants to see the children she loves happy before she goes." The word children echoed in the room. Mary looked at Mrs. Carmen, surprised. "Is that really how you see me? As a daughter?" "I do. From the first day you arrived, I felt I was getting back something I'd lost. Not just an employee, but a daughter of the heart." Mary knelt by the bed, embracing Mrs. Carmen. "Then you forgive me? Truly forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive, my dear. You only did what you had the right to do, seek justice for your mother." Richard knelt on the other side of the bed. "And me, Mom? Do you forgive me for being blind for so long? You couldn't have known, son. And now that you do, you're doing the right thing. I'm proud of you." 3 weeks later, the Loretta Smith Foundation was officially launched. The ceremony was simple but moving. Mary gave a speech about second chances and delayed justice. Richard announced that the foundation would have permanent funding from the Thompson family to help women who'd been wronged at work. The press reported it as a noble gesture from a traditional family, acknowledging and correcting past mistakes. No one questioned the details much, satisfied with the redemption narrative. Mrs. Carmen attended the ceremony in a wheelchair, smiling proudly as Mary and Richard cut the ribbon. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered to Mary. "I hope so." That night, Richard asked Mary to be his girlfriend, officially. Not in the study, not in the kitchen, but in the garden, where the flowers the old gardener had planted still bloomed every year. "I know it's early," he said, holding her hands. "I know we need time to build trust, to overcome everything that happened, but I want to try, Mary. I want to build something beautiful with you." Mary looked around. The garden was lit by small fairy lights Richard had ordered installed. It was romantic, but simple, the way she liked it. "Okay," she replied. "Let's try." The kiss that followed was gentle, hesitant, full of unspoken promises. Mrs. Carmen passed away 2 months later on a quiet Sunday morning. Mary and Richard were with her, each holding one of her hands. Her last words were, "Take care of each other." The funeral was well attended. Mary cried as if she'd lost a true mother. Richard comforted her, but he was crying too. They'd lost not just the family matriarch, but the person who had brought them together in such an unlikely way. 6 months later, Mary moved into the big house. Not as an employee, but as Richard's partner. She kept her own apartment in town, because independence mattered to her, but she spent most of her time in the house where her mother had worked decades ago. The Loretta Smith Foundation thrived. It had already helped dozens of women secure reparations for unfair dismissals. Mary ran the operations with passion, feeling she was finally doing something to honor her mother's memory. Richard proved to be a surprising partner, patient when she had tough days remembering the past, generous with his time and resources for the foundation, and gradually, deeply in love. "Sometimes I think this is all too good to be true," Mary said one night, lying in the bed that had once been Mrs. Carmen's, now transformed into their shared bedroom. Why? A poor woman, daughter of a wronged maid, falling in love with the son of the employers and still getting justice for her family. "It sounds like something out of a soap opera." Richard laughed, kissing the top of her head. "Maybe it is, but it's our soap opera, and I like the ending we're writing." Mary snuggled closer to him. "Do you think your mother planned all this? Brought us here knowing we might fall in love? Knowing my mother, it's entirely possible. She was a wise woman. She was. And she knew some stories are worth it, even when they start with pain." Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the curtains. The scent of jasmine drifted in through the window, mingling with the aroma of cake that sometimes wafted from the kitchen when Mary baked on weekends. The house no longer held secrets. The drawers had been emptied, the unsent letters finally delivered to their rightful recipient. The kitchen where Loretta had worked with dignity was now where her daughter prepared meals with love. And in the garden, the flowers continued to bloom every year, proof that something beautiful can always grow, even in soil watered by old tears. Mary fell asleep that night, thinking that her mother, wherever she was, could finally rest in peace. Justice had come, late but true, and love, impossible but real, had turned a story of pain into one of hope. Sometimes when the house was very quiet, Mary swore she could hear a whisper in the wind. "Thank you, my daughter. Thank you for not letting hate win over love." And she smiled, knowing she'd chosen the right path, the path that didn't repeat destruction, but built something new on the ruins of the past. The path her mother would be proud to see her walk.